This is the Fender Rhodes Chroma Polaris, a classic vintage analog polysynth, first released in 1984. It features 6 voices, dual analog VCOs, analog filters and VCAs, sequencer, and many other features under the hood. Originally designed by ARP engineers, the synth's raw, aggressive tone is unmistakable. Join me for a review as we take a deeper look at the Fender Rhodes Chroma Polaris and its classic analog sound. So this is the Fender Rhodes Chroma Polaris. This is a classic vintage synth released by Fender Rhodes in 1984, but this synth also has a lot of ARP heritage. It was the sort of next version of the Rhodes Chroma, a lower cost version essentially, which was put out by Fender Rhodes at that time. It's fully analog. It has 2 VCOs, analog filters, analog VCAs, and also a lot of great features under the hood, such as a sequencer and patch memory, full MIDI spec, etc. So today I'm going to take you through this synth in a bit more detail, play some sounds along the way, a little bit of sound design and some patches a little bit later, and then towards the end I'll give you my final thoughts. So let's start out here and just take a look at this front panel. So on the far left here we have a sequencer section. So there is a full sequencer that's on board. There's a keyboard section where you can set up splits, layers, and things of that nature. There's a master tuning section as well as volume control. There's dual oscillator sections here, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, which has both a ring modulator and sync on board. We have a sweep section, which is essentially the LFO, and there's a sine wave or a square wave. There's the filter section here, which has control over cutoff, resonance, depth, etc., as well as a noise control. We have a filter envelope, as well as control for fixed or velocity, and a volume envelope as well, so ADR here as well with control for fixed or velocity. To the right of that is this assignable control section where you have a lot of different buttons to give you more fine control over things like volume pedal, cutoff pedals, glide, vibrato, detuning, things of that nature. And to the far right here, this is where you can store and load patches. And there's various functionality on secondary functions to, edit the sequences or other functions that are on this synth. And of course, to the far left here is a pitch and mod wheel or mod bender levers. So with that said, let's now take a look at the oscillator section. You have a dual oscillator setup and you have either a saw wave or a pulse wave. So we'll start out with saw. So you have 6 voices. Now the great thing with this synth is you also have pulse width control, not only over the pulse wave, but also over the saw wave. So let's bring those in. That's oscillator 1, oscillator 2. We can also detune oscillator 2 against oscillator 1. Some more chorusy types of effects. That sounds pretty huge. Okay, now let's take a listen to the pulse wave. And to enable or disable the pulse waves, you actually use the pulse width slider. And of course, we do have pulse width modulation. Which is controlled by the LFO rate. And the great thing with the Chroma Polaris is you have per voice LFOs. Each voice gets its own distinct LFO rate. Or should I say phase? Now, let's take a look at something like oscillator sync. Transpose second oscillator. We have a ring modulator that's on board as well. You get those metallic overtones. These types of sounds. We have obviously pulse width control, which I just showed you with the LFO. You can also have that through a envelope. Pretty cool stuff. Here it cutting in and out. Let's take a look now at the filter section. And it does self-oscillate, but it just jumps right into it. We also have control over LFO. There is also obviously envelope control here for the filter. It's bipolar as well. The envelope, which we just saw, has an attack phase. So you can have envelopes that fade in to the filter. You have a decay, sustain, sustain decay, release. We also have a fixed or a touched control for this envelope. So if I enable with the light on, that means we have touch sensitivity, in other words, velocity for this filter. Volume envelope, attack. Quite long attack time as well. Decay. Release. Listen to how long that goes. almost infinite, depending how long and what setting you leave it at here. They can drone on. Really cool. So in this assignable control section, you can see there's a number of functions on the left and on the right. Unfortunately, you need a pedal for this, you know, to access some of these functions, which I don't have right now, but you can get into things like glide, the rate control for the pedal for that glide. You can use the vibrato pedal. There's control over pitch with the pedal, and as well as cutoff. So very fully featured functionality with the pedal setup here, as well as for a volume pedal as well. You do have control over volume itself for the patches, which you can just select there and adjust the slider. On the right here, you can see there's a number of functions. There's a mod lever range control. So that is for things like vibrato. So if I adjust that, you have a bend lever range control. You have vibrato delay control as well. And oscillator 2 envelope. And of course that's controlled by this envelope here. This is great with sync. There's also noise control on this synth. So if we enable noise, you can actually play this filter as well with key tracking. So you can tune it. And of course you can bring in your oscillators on top of that. So now let's take a look at some of the other functions on this synth. On the far left is this sequencer section. So you can actually record a sequence, play it back, you can play over it, things of that nature. It is fairly complex, I would say. If you look at the manual, it is fairly fully featured in its own way from that era. But it is a real-time sequencer to my knowledge. I'm not really sure if there is a way to do step entry, but we can try recording something at least. And if we play, you can hear it did not capture the actual settings of the panel at that point. And if I adjust as it plays back, there's no effect. So that is an annoyance. There's probably a way that I'm not aware of to do that if you get into the deeper functions of the synth, but you can at least play over top. And that you can adjust. There's also this keyboard section, which you can take a look at as well in the manual, but essentially you can set up a split, you can do a layer, and things of that nature, which I'll try and demonstrate a little bit later when I play some patches. But other than that, on the far right here is the actual bank select, program select. As I'd mentioned, you can load patches here. There is a number of banks. You've got banks A through K, and each bank can have up to 12 patches. So that's quite a lot of storage for the time. And up here in the upper left is something called upper function. So if you select that, then you can access the top level functions of each one of these membrane buttons. So for instance, for the sequencer, it says which sequence do you want to select? Do you want to chain a sequence? Do you want to have a sequence queue set up? Sequence tempo, sequence programming, select the sequence, erase the sequence, swap the sequence, save all sequences, load sequence. So this whole first two rows is all about the sequencer. The second or third row here is store programming on the upper. You can erase a program, you can swap a program, you can save a program, you can save all programs or load a program. And then lastly, there's memory used. I guess there's some sort of function there. And of course, back then they were using cassette tapes, so you can actually set up the cassette to run or stop, to load in patches and things of that nature. You can verify the data, and you can load all back in if you wanted to. So this function area here is mostly about the sequencer and about program control. So before we jump into some actual presets that come with the synth, I just want to noodle a little bit and play some sort of improvisations with some of the tones that are possible. Okay, so hope you guys enjoyed some of those sounds. Those were some of the patches and presets that come with the synth. And before I end things off here, I just wanted to give you my sort of final thoughts of things that I like about the synth, things I don't like as much about it, and then basically my conclusions here. So, what do I like about the Fender Rhodes Chroma Polaris? Well, as you have probably heard throughout this video, this is a fairly aggressive sounding and fat CEM synthesizer, fully analog. So if you're looking for that type of aggressive raw tone, that art tone, it's all here. And it's definitely different than many other synths that I've used. And I really like it. So if you're looking for that type of tone, it's all here. The fact that the saw waves have pulse width modulation. That is really cool. Not many synths from that era have pulse width modulation for saw waves. Mostly it's just for the pulse wave. But as you can hear here, it is possible with the Chroma Polaris. The fact that this synth comes with a full MIDI spec is pretty crazy for back then, 1984. And so you can, you know, patch it into a system, into your studio. So great to have that directly on board from the get-go. The pedal control, which I wasn't able to demonstrate today, but it's integral to this synth. In the assignable control, you've got a whole left section there all about the pedal controls. So if you enjoy using pedals with your synth, this is a great choice because it's designed from the beginning to have that. The fact that there is also splits, layers possible here, baked in, also a great feature and function which you can leverage for your playing. Patch memory, 132 patches on board. Great options there for storing your own custom patches. And especially from that era, that's a significant amount of patch storage, I'd say. There was a dual sort of sine wave and square wave LFO on board, which is great to have. There are invertible envelopes here in terms of the filter control here. It's a bipolar sort of envelope control. Great to have as well. The fact that there's a ring modulator and there's sync on board gives you extra sonic possibilities. And of course, velocity control over envelope as well as amp. And lastly here is the sequencer. Yes, it is fairly complex, but there's a lot of functions on board, and you can do a lot with it, depending on what you like. It is mostly a real-time sequencer, but nonetheless, it's great to have that option available. So, what are some things I'm not such a fan of with this synth? Well, the fact is there's no mixer section. You can't really mix the level of the oscillators, the noise, things of that nature. So that's kind of unfortunate. The filter resonance, as I've shown throughout this demo, sort of activates at the highest level, just turns on like that. So there's not as smooth as I would have liked. A couple other things here is that there's a lot of buttons, sort of membrane buttons on the panel here. It can get a bit confusing with the lower function and the upper function to access the different parameters that are throughout. Sometimes you do have to consult the manual. I have had to do that on a few occasions to even understand what's going on behind the scenes. Over time you'll get used to it, and it is fairly self-explanatory, but there is some button sort of combinations you need to know to get into the deeper parameters, I would say. And related to this membrane panel, these panels, they are fairly fragile underneath. There's some connectors and things that eventually can become disconnected or rusty or whatever the connections are, and the membrane panel is a bit prone to failure. So if you have the opportunity to replace it, I would recommend it. It's just something to watch out for on any Chroma Polaris. Once it's replaced, it's pretty much good to go for a long, long time. No issues. I haven't had any issues since I've had this synth for 10 plus years. It's been rock solid. But that is just something to watch out for on any used Chroma Polaris that hasn't been replaced. The sequencer, yes, as I mentioned, it is fairly complex. I just want to touch on one last thing. It's mostly real time. I haven't really found a way to do step sequencing, but if there is a way, please let me know. But if not, that's unfortunate. This is also a very heavy synth. I think it's like 50 pounds or something like that. It is fairly bulky to carry around. So if you don't like heavy synths, this might not be a good choice. And I would say that there's only one LFO on board. Yes, it's kind of cool that it has per voice LFO and as well as a global LFO, but it's still only one LFO. There's only two shapes there. And that noise, it is a digital noise, I believe, because it loops. There's a certain cycle it loops. And that can be a little bit distracting. So that's something to just be aware of. All that said, this is my final thoughts here on the Chroma Polaris. This is a very powerful sounding, raw, ARP sort of tone synthesizer with dual VCO setup. Can get quite fat. And if you like the ARP sound from that era, this is probably one of the best choices that is still reasonably priced for a polyphonic from ARP. And it has dual oscillators, which are fantastic. There's a rich, powerful sound to it. It has that ARP heritage. It has Fender Rhodes history in there as well. It's MIDI capable, and I'd say this is more of a player synth, more so than a sound design synth. So, if you have the opportunity to grab one, I would definitely give it a shot. You get some very lush sounds. If you're a fan of that ARP sound, then this might be the choice for you. So please, let me know what you think about the Fender Rhodes Chroma Polaris. Have you owned one? Have you played one? Let me know in the comments. Very curious to know your opinions. And with that, thank you very much for watching. And I will see you again next time.